go. Psychedelics. Saturdays. What did we learn?
It's fluid.
Yes, it's day fluid.
Day fluid.
It identifies as any day. It needs to. What did we learn today? What was...
Today was about decolonizing healing.
Decolonizing healing.
Yeah. So.
As in, like, white people have colonized healing?
I mean, I guess in some way you could say that when you really think about it.
Okay.
As opposed to like traditional systems of healing or ways of healing. Like there's like, I think
it's
that
like mainstream medicine.
Mainstream medicine versus coming back to the energy that physicians can assign things to do. They can tell you things to do, but at the end of the day, nature is actually what heals. He gave a great example of, like, let's say you have a heart attack and you realize that you need surgery. The doctor can go in, it can perform the surgery, it can do all the things that it needs to, but at some point, nature has to run its course, meaning however long it takes you to heal from that is nature doing what nature does. It's the body's intelligence doing what it knows how to do. So physicians and mainstream medical field can only go so far.
Right.
And
it's
so
just an assist.
It's an assist. And so basically in like decolonizing healing, it's like, okay, mainstream can only go so far. Where and at what point does the body's own innate intelligence, nature's own intelligence, start to actively take over? And we talked about that with psychedelics a little bit, where it's like you can use psychedelics to reach different expanded states, and still within that, there's this natural element, this like unforeseen, unconscious element that will emerge, that in your everyday waking state doesn't necessarily happen.
It doesn't happen, or just not as aware of it?
You're not as aware of it. Not as aware of it. It unconsciously shows up. Or like if you have trauma, your defense mechanisms or however you responded to that trauma might show up thinking that it's protecting you, when actually it's blocking you from being able to reach the states that you would need to in order to actually heal that. So psychedelics can help with that.
It hinders rather than helps.
Yeah.
Okay, so sounds like it's... Psychedelics help because it gets us out of our own technology's way.
Our own technology's way,
Yeah,
or
body
the program,
technology.
right? The program, because he talks about there's like 3 axes of connection or of connectedness. Because he says ultimately, it's like love, healing, and connectedness is what people are seeking. Love, no, it wasn't healing, it was something else. But there's like the intrapersonal, which is like how I relate to myself, how I relate to my body, how I relate to myself, the ego. There's interpersonal, which is how I relate to you. And then there's like a spiritual element that I feel like also somatics is like, we kind of can't deny that there's like a spiritual, mysterious element that makes everything function and work the way that it does. It's its own technology, right?
Yeah, we don't know what it is.
But it's doing something.
It's doing something. Yeah.
Right. And it's always this undercurrent of the natural world, seen and unseen. And so by decolonizing, healing, that means you don't necessarily, like, he speaks about how symptoms are signals. I talk about this in my work a lot also.
I agree.
And so it's a signal of something. It's the body's language saying something's not
wrong.
operating. We're not at our best, right? And so in decolonizing, healing, it's like, that doesn't automatically necessarily mean that we just need to go to a doctor and go, hey, I'm having these symptoms, because how they treat you is based upon if you have a certain set number of symptoms, then they'll prescribe you a certain something to go along with it. And the whole way the medical field works is that you go in and you say, I have an issue, and they go, okay, what's going to be the thing that will help you start to function in society and conditionally. So it's like they're already bred. It's like, oh, let's just get you back to function, whatever that means. That's not necessarily holistic. Let's get your total body back in function. It's like, hey, let's give you something to treat that symptom.
Right. Let's just
But
get
it's not
you up
treating
and
the total
running.
body. Exactly. So you can function in society.
I think part of that is people having this expectation to be prescribed something. It's like, oh, I'm ill. I need to go to the doctor, and I need to be given something to be made better.
Yeah.
rather than, I see it from people in my family all the time. It's like, oh, I'm unwell, I need to go and get medicine. It's like, no, you just need to let your body do its thing.
Yeah, totally. We're in like a prescription culture, and I think we see that. It's like COVID was great examples of that, where they're talking about all these symptoms and all these side effects and all the ways you could get harmed or die or whatever, right? But like nobody was talking about wellness. Nobody was talking about this is how to support your immune system so you don't get COVID. They're just like, don't catch it. Don't get it, because then all these things, you could kill your grandparents, right? So there was like this whole, I mean, outside of the, propaganda around it, there was this whole gap in the media and mainstream media and wellness culture in general that talks about well-being and total body care. So it's emotional body, it's physical body, it's spiritual body. And when you go in saying, I have an ailment, please treat me, they go, okay, we'll treat the ailment, but we're not treating you, the totality of you and your systems and your body.
Yeah.
That's what nature does. So when we actually stop rushing to fix the problem and we actually tune into the body and tune into the signals that it's offering, it's like, what is it actually telling us?
Right. I kind of see it as like, I'm trying to use an analogy, but there's a leak over here. Like this bit is leaking. Okay, we'll patch that up. But it's not actually pointing to the big problem that's over here.
Yeah.
You're just patching up the little thing and completely ignoring, like, okay, well, why is this bit leaking? Oh, it's because there's an actual problem.
Yeah, there's a much bigger problem over here. Or like the system is faulty at large.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of like what, when we go and we get these pills or we get these prescriptions for things, they come with their own plethora of side effects that can cause harm to other systems in the body. But also it's like this is why they say it's like colonizing it. It's like we're trying to act like we actually have control over what's happening when we don't. It's like there's always going to be that undercurrent of the natural world that even the medical field can't fully fix, right? So it's like you're saying, okay, we're just going to put tape over that hole. Meanwhile, that covers it for the time being, but maybe 6 months later you got to go in because now something else isn't quite right. And they're not noticing or trying to connect the interconnectedness of the system.
Not seeing the thing as a whole, but just seeing like the little problems.
Yeah. So it was cool because today he shared some like case studies from different trials. One was like an MDMA assisted therapy, and the others were ketamine assisted therapies. And it's just beautiful to see how people are responding, where it's like when they're on these psychedelics or accessing these expanded states. He mentions that you can reach expanded states through breath work, through dance and music. Sex, right? So you don't necessarily need a psychedelic to connect these dots, but psychedelics help a lot because it just drops those filters, like what you're saying.
Right. It's kind of like just a big shove.
Yeah. It's like let's just like lift the veil a little bit to your everyday reality. I say that in quotes because we fucking don't know anything, Just as much as we don't know the unseen, we really don't understand the seen either, I think.
I see that as saying, yes, you can have the psychedelics to support you going in that direction, but then there's all the things that you can do in everyday life that you don't consider to be a psychedelic experience, but can be. Just like the music and breathing and yoga and sex.
Yeah. And I noticed that it's like when I'm dancing or when I'm channeling for sessions or something, or when we've had sex, there's these components that start to come together, and I'm seeing outside of my current reality. I'm in those expanded states. Orgasm is such a great example of an expanded state. You can get visions. You can see the interconnectivity of things, and psychedelics deepen that because they alter your actual present reality to where you kind of have to let go and move into that surrendered state so you can actually see the interconnectivity of this thing and that trauma and that influence and that influence. And psychedelics are great because they give people permission to enter into that surrendered state so that they can see the reality of what's happening underneath the surface. like in the unseen, for instance.
Okay, and this is where the holistic healing occurs, because you're in that space of interconnectivity.
Yeah, you can start to understand like why you have the connection that you have with your body or don't have. You can start to understand how trauma has impacted and influenced how you think and feel about yourself. Because the filter around those things, the protective mechanisms around those things have now been lifted or they're softened to where in these psychedelic states, in theory, there's no reason you should need to protect yourself. And then you have access that's like, wow, now I can see that situation with way more compassion because my ego isn't so connected to what I'm making it mean or how it influences me and impacts me.
So is that saying, like, have the psychedelic experience so that you can see what the actual issue is that the medicine is in potentiality masking, so you can get the whole picture of what you need to do to give yourself the healing rather than just the prescription of the patch.
Yeah. And again, this can happen without psychedelics, right? But
Sure.
like, I know that we've both had moments on psychedelics that were like really profound, like connected dots. It was like, oh my God, I'm seeing that now.
Right.
I couldn't see that because there was just all these layers built up in the way. But now that my perception is more open and I'm more receptive, I'm able to see that with more compassion and understanding. And that happens also like when I've done music and movement in those states. It's like we're accessing these other realms of energy because we're moving with the breath. We're literally moving our bodies. So the energy has no place to get stuck. All the moving parts are working together to reach these expanded states that, clients talk about feeling out of body, or getting these visions, or all of a sudden there's like the answer to their problem. It's like, and it's usually that moment. It's like, oh my God.
Of course.
Like, of course, it was right there, but I just couldn't see it, right? I'm so in my ego, I'm so in my burden, or in my suffering. We talked about suffering today.
Did you?
Yeah, just like suffering and how suffering typically occurs like when we don't have or don't assign meaning to something. So when it's just not meeting this desire of mine, I'm suffering. But if I actually went into the suffering and the wisdom of the suffering and what it was trying to teach me about how I respond to life, once I assign it meaning, I'm no longer suffering because it has a purpose. Right? And so that's there's a lot of like depth in that. And he talked about the Frankl, who did Man's Search for Meaning. He recommended that book, and he was like, he's like, once he was able to assign meaning to his suffering and purpose to his suffering, he was able to overcome it.
It becomes, you can find gratitude for it, and it becomes a useful thing.
It becomes a catalyst. Like, and he's a great example. It was a catalyst for him to not only get out of there, but then be in psychiatry and be in the field, write that book. That's like, other people around him were suffering, and they were just caught in their suffering. His ability to make meaning of it and make use of it for the purpose of himself, but also for the betterment of other people, was what really allowed him to survive.
So how can you find positive meaning to the suffering that you're still clinging on to? Like, it's clinging on to because it's trying to wait for you to find that nugget.
Right. Yeah, of course.
And when you can find the nugget, you can let it go.
Yeah. Or you can integrate it.
Right.
And so one of the things they talk about is like when you see symptoms, the medical field will see it as a dysfunction. Something's not functioning. But when we talk about like decolonizing healing, it's like, no, we see a symptom as an ally because it's trying to tell us that something's off and it needs support. And so when you can listen to it and give it that for the total of the systems, you'll find that you have much more, what am I trying to say? It's the betterment of all, right? It's like the betterment of total holistic care as opposed to going and taking something, crossing your fingers that you don't get the side effects, or not knowing the side effects until months later, years later, etc.
Right.
What is it like to view these things that we typically would see as ailments or frustrations or sufferings? I think about my yoni health as a good example. where for a long time, it was just, I was like, you're just sick all the time, you're cancerous, like, I had such a disconnection, and I wasn't seeing it as like, hey, it's trying to speak up and go, I need your attention. Like, I'm suffering down here. But instead I was like in the space, like, no, I'm suffering because of you. And so now being in this space, it's like, oh, this is telling me something about myself and how I am or am not taking care.
We're suffering.
We're suffering as a unit. Like, oh my gosh, like, and the inner dialogue between myself and my body has changed so much because of that, is I'm not seeing it as like, oh, something's wrong with you. It's like, something is wrong and something's upset and something's not right. And also, how can I see that as an ally for what I need to give my body, take myself, my ego self out of it?
What can I do to support you? Yeah, and then extract that out, and then that becomes relational as well. Okay, you're experiencing something, you're experiencing suffering. What's my role in supporting you in that? And then extract that even further as to society. Someone, a faction is suffering, it's because something is needing addressing. Yeah.
And until there's a collective big enough, a collective conscious within the self or within the community, until that's established big enough, real change doesn't really occur, because it's
just patching.
It's just patching, right? So I can do it, and I can patch myself, I can patch my own leaks, and that can support the water going through the pipes. But obviously, the more people that are healing and doing the actual infrastructural work to repair the thing that causes the suffering, the more the system then starts to change.
Right. Like, you could just give your yoni medicine and get rid of the symptoms, but it doesn't actually deal with the underlying issue.
Right. But by changing my diet, that starts to change the whole system and how it responds. So it's like, okay, yes, I could keep taking pills and I could keep destroying my microbiome. Yeah. Done that before. Terrible. Or I could shift my diet that actually supports a healthy microbiome.
Right.
Yes, that takes a bit longer. Yes, that comes with its own frustrating or suffering sometimes, because I want things that I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But the underlying result is like my total body is thanking me for those changes.
It becomes a mind-based thing then. It's like, well, you want something other than what you already have, and it's like, well, just let go of the expectation of it being something and just
the
work with
it.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
It's the same thing. It's like, oh, I've got high blood pressure. It's like, oh, I need to take these pills. It's like, no, you need to exercise and work on your diet.
Get your heart rate down.
Right. You need to do all this other stuff. It's not about just having a pill. Like,
it's funny, actually. My dad talked about that because he went to the doctor and had high cholesterol, and they immediately wanted to assign him. They immediately wanted to assign him pills. My dad was like, "No, I'll just stop eating bacon. It's so much better." He's like, "And I'll start working out." And he's like, "And then after like several months of me cutting those things out of my diet, if I still need something, then we can talk about it."
Right.
And he was like, "Well, no, just tell me I have high cholesterol and just send me." Like, he didn't even have to go to the doctor to get the prescription, or they didn't even tell him about other things they could do. They just phoned him and were like, "Hey, yeah, so you can go pick up your prescription." My dad's like, "I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Let me make some lifestyle changes first."
I conscious of time, conversation for another time. Be really curious to explore why we think that's happened.
Yeah, totally.
Was that explored?
No.
Okay.
Like a little bit, but it's more of just how far removed we've come from traditional cultures and how they would use plant medicines and just nature, like herbs and plants and things to heal. Like, it was only with the introduction of like Western pharmacology that all of a sudden it started to be like a for-profit. Yes, we're trying to help you, but then of course there's always that like, but are you though? Like, to what degree are you trying to help us, and to what degree is it for profit?
Sure, because if you were really trying to help, it would be a holistic solution rather than just a patch.
Exactly.
It's like, we'll patch this, but then 6 months down the line you're going to need this patch, so come back when you need that patch.
Yeah, totally.
Interesting. Okay.
Thank you.